former Congressman Joe Walsh and Malik Abdul. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
So first, to kick it off, Mike Johnson is expected to face a tough battle in the speakership race. And Joe, what do you make of Johnson's chances?
Well, I think he'll probably get the gavel to start because Donald Trump, and let's remember, this is completely Trump's party. Donald Trump doesn't want anything to interfere with anything Trump wants to do in January. He doesn't want anything to interfere with January 6th, i.e. the election results being certified. Remember, without a speaker, the House can't conduct any other business. And Trump doesn't want a lot of craziness in January because he has a very aggressive, I would say cruel, and dangerous agenda that he wants to jump right into in January.
So Malik, what's your take on the current dynamic, particularly after Trump's endorsement, and are there viable alternatives within the party, you think?
To your last question, no, and that's why Mike Johnson will be the next Speaker of the House. Now, the reality is that Republicans only have a very slim margin. I think he could only lose about one or two members. There are some members who are already signaling that they will not support him. You can be rest assured that you probably won't get any Democrats to support Mike Johnson, but Donald Trump has signaled that this is his guy. And it's not, and it's in addition to January 6th, and his certification is also important, it is about making sure that Donald Trump on day one is able to hit the ground running, making sure that we're not having the same fight that we had, what was that last year with Kevin McCarthy in those 15 rounds. Donald Trump simply cannot afford that because the first 100 days of a presidential administration is when a lot of those big policy proposals are rolled out. And I think that Donald Trump and Susie Wiles, because she is will be in the White House, I think they want to hit the ground running.
What are some of the potential consequences for the incoming president if the House does not act quickly enough to elect a new speaker? Would there be a temporary speaker again, or would the position remain empty during the interim? Joe, you were a congressman before. What's your take on that?
Look, let's just be really clear. The House cannot open for business without a speaker. So they can't do anything. When I was sworn in, that's the first thing we do as a member. We pick the speaker. If that takes a day, it takes a day. If that takes a week or two or three, that's the only thing the House can focus on and work on before conducting any other business. So this would delay certification. It would delay any other work that Republicans want to try to get done to lay the groundwork for when Trump is sworn in. I think the calendar is Mike Johnson's best friend. The calendar will get this done and probably give him the gavel on Friday.
And Joe, switching gears here, under the final days of President Biden's presidency, the U.S. Department of the Interior has unveiled two major conservation initiatives to protect public lands and wildlife habitats. And these initiatives come amid Republican calls to halt new regulatory actions during the transition period. How significant do you think is this, and what do you make of the timing here?
Well, they are significant moves, and these moves on the environment are not the only significant things President Biden's doing here as his presidency comes to a close. He's finding other pockets of money to give to Ukraine. Look, I support Ukraine. I support a lot of what President Biden's doing, but this is pretty typical of presidents before they leave, right? Vis-a-vis executive order and some of their executive authority, they try to get as much done to protect certain things before the new guy comes in.
And on the same topic of energy here, Malik, Trump has promised to issue a day one executive order to reinstate federal approvals for the Keystone XL pipeline and also impose tariffs on Canadian imports, including petroleum. So how can we strike a balance here between land conservation and pursuing energy independence?
Well, I think it's important to realize is that when you're talking about things that Donald Trump says that he's going to do on day one, that typically refers to executive orders. And we know with executive orders, these are things that are just governed within the executive authority of the president. It doesn't mean that because the executive order is actually issued, then the problem is solved the next day. When it comes to things as far as energy, that is a long-term process. So even if the Keystone pipeline, even if that is reinstated, we're still talking about a long process, but it is a symbolic move. And depending on where we are, those symbolic moves can do things like actually benefit the stock market, consumer confidence. A lot of this stuff is kind of built into it. But just because you sign an executive order, it does not mean that the problem is solved the next day. I think the problem is going to be that people expect that that's just how government works. And unfortunately, it doesn't.
Well, lots to look into then. And lastly, looking back on 2024 and the election, what were our biggest moments as a nation, and what do you hope politically we can focus on in 2025? Let's start with Joe.
Look, that's such a great question, because what a wild and crazy political year, right? The biggest moment was that debate that Joe Biden had when all of a sudden the world turned and eventually everybody realized he can't be the Democratic nominee. And then the vice president became the nominee, and she had 100 days to mount a campaign against Donald Trump. Looking back, that was an incredibly difficult task. But we've never seen anything like that ever in modern American history. I think in 2025, you're going to see constant battle and constant infighting among Republicans. Johnson will hang on to his speakership for now, but it's going to be chaotic in the House because, as Malik said, he's got about a 1 to 2 vote margin on everything.
And Malik, your take?
Yeah, so I agree with some of that. I will say that as far as 2024, I think the biggest story for me is the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. The second story would be Joe Biden basically dropping out of the race, which is not something that we see in our politics, where you have an incumbent president dropping out of the race and the vice president stepping in. Now, I think that even if Joe Biden had stayed in, despite what he's alluding to now, I think that Joe Biden still would have won because Democrats were unable to read the electorate. So whether or not Kamala Harris had 100 days or 180 days, Kamala Harris would have lost because I really do think that they misread the electorate. But that is also something Republicans are going to have to be cognizant of as well, not overstating what Donald Trump's mandate actually is.
Well, what a year has been, and apparently many lessons to learn for both parties here. Thank you so much, both former Congressman Joe Walsh and Malik Abdul, and Happy New Year to you.
Thanks for having us.